Hello, and thank you for joining me. I'm Perry, writer and illustrator of the Floof and Feathers webcomic series. And today I want to talk about how I make my comics using the Procreate app on iPad. If you don't have Procreate, though, don't leave just yet. Everything I'll be talking about can more or less be applied to almost any drawing software you have access to. Just the names of buttons and overall appearance will obviously look different from what you're seeing here, but it should still function essentially the same way. So with that being said, let's get into it. And where should we begin? At the beginning, of course, with character design. Now, if you're like me, that is, didn't go to art school, have no formal art training whatsoever, apart from a 101 class my first year of high school, and at this point that doesn't really count, and have no portfolio or years of practice to build off of, then getting started with making art can seem like an incredibly daunting prospect. And I get it. But rather than looking at these as handicaps holding you back, think of it as being a sort of blank slate. When you're just starting out, there's nowhere to go but forward and nothing to make but progress. And if someone like me, someone with no real experience or training or education can do it, then I think anyone can. If you can hold a pencil, you can draw. Alright, so how do you design a character then? Well, let's look at the characters from my own comic series for some inspiration. Floof and Feathers didn't always look the way that it does today, and in fact, if you went back to the true origins of this comic series, chances are good that you'd hardly recognize it. Instead of the clean lines and full-color comic panels, you can still see the influence of these very early drawings in the comic series today, though, even if the overall appearance and execution has somewhat improved. When designing a character to draw, my own method that I like to use is somewhat akin to caricature. What are the most notable, recognizable features of the subject that can be easily exaggerated and made unique to them? And don't worry that if what you draw looks good or realistic or whatever, I think that's one of the most intimidating ideas for anyone starting out with making art. I know it was for me anyway. But something I've learned is, what you draw doesn't have to look real as long as it looks recognizable. Because let's be honest, this doesn't look anything like a real dog, right? But it's still recognizable as a dog, and in the end, that's all that really matters. So that being said, let's take a closer look at the process of bringing these cartoon avatars to life. When first drawing a character sketch, I typically start from a head-on point of view. For the sake of ensuring that features remain well balanced, I'll usually start by going into the settings and the drawing assist, and then select the symmetry function from the editing dropdown. Keeping in mind the idea of exaggerating features, with Finnegan, I start with the nose and snout, making a large, rounded snout there right around the nose. Next, zoom in, and I add some large, cartoonish eyes, and place a patch of white fur between them in the middle of Finnegan's forehead. Then, after adding the general shape of the head, and making sure that that's well rounded, I will add a pair of overly large floppy ears and the collar. Depending on the character you're designing, you can keep the symmetry function turned on to sketch the basic shape of the body. This works well in my own comics whenever Finn and Pippin are sitting still, but when they need to point or gesture or really move around in any way, drawing a perfectly symmetrical body and limbs ends up creating more problems than not. So I'll usually turn this function off once the head, face, and basic body shape have been outlined. It also helps to turn this off when I'm drawing the tail, since Finn only has the one tail and doesn't need one sticking out of both sides. Now, designing Pippin's own cartoon avatar is a similar process to Finnegan, but with a number of distinct differences. That's another thing to keep in mind when designing characters for whatever project you're working on, whether it be a single panel cartoon or an ongoing series or a full-blown graphic novel. Give your characters clear, unique differences in their key features to keep them individually recognizable. So you can see, just like with Finnegan, I started with the nose and snout, but already there's a subtle change in design. With Finnegan's snout is more shallow and wide, Pippin's is a little bit more elongated and not quite as wide on the sides. He also has that patch of fur in the middle of his forehead, but it's longer and narrower and curved inward more. Also, his eyes are set up a little higher into the middle of his face, and his ears are also very overly large and floppy, but are much, much more elongated. Both characters are dogs and both share a similar basic shape and design process, but through a series of exaggerating their key features in different ways, we can actually create two distinct characters who are clearly recognizable as nothing more than simple outlines, even without their final coloring and details. Designing Olivia's character was a bit of a different story, though. Unlike her siblings, I almost never draw Olivia from a full head-on perspective, except for one sketch back in October, and even for me that was a little unsettling. Instead, I usually do this three-quarter side profile, and when deciding what features to exaggerate along with the eyes, the most obvious answer was, of course, the beak. Now, in reality, her beak is nowhere near the size that it is drawn here in the comics, but making this part of her face more elongated and oversized accomplishes two things. It provides a stylized focal point for the face and makes for a subtly more comical appearance. Then once I have the basic shape of her head there in place, I can add her signature crest feather to the top of her head, use a long swooping line coming down from the neck, and add some curved lines on to make the wing over there on the side. Then I just have to erase that first. Then I just have to pop on her tail, add chest and belly, little bump there for her feet to come out of, and there you have it. We have a bird. But of course, designing and sketching out your characters is only the first step. These guys still need their characteristic colors and shading, so stay tuned, and in my next video, I'll show you how I use color, textures, and shadows in Procreate to really bring these comics to life. If you enjoyed this video, then why not tap the subscribe button and give a thumbs up? It truly does help my channel so much. You might also want to consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/floofandfeathers, as well as visiting my main website and giving me a quick follow on social media. Links to everything are in the description below, and be sure to leave a comment letting me know what you'd like to see in the future. With that being said, thanks again for stopping by, and I'll see you all next time.